Mr. President, I want to remind my colleagues that this work period was supposed to be our opportunity to finally enact, after years of delay, the free trade agreements with our allies South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. These agreements were signed over 4 years ago, and this administration has had more than 2.5 years to submit them to Congress for consideration, but they have failed to do so. Unfortunately, we are going to have to continue to wait at least until September before we get a vote. Why does it matter that we pass these agreements? It matters for 2 reasons, Mr. President. First, because expanding trade opportunities creates American jobs. Second, because we live in a competitive global economy and other nations are not standing still while we delay. Economists overwhelmingly agree that expanding trade opportunities creates jobs. The Obama White House, for example, estimates that enactment of these 3 trade agreements will boost exports by at least $12 billion, supporting over 70,000 American jobs. The fact that lowering barriers to U.S. exports will create jobs for American workers is just common sense. Consider that our market is already largely open to foreign imports, including those from Korea, Colombia, and Panama. Without trade agreements to ensure similar treatment for our exporters, American businesses will continue to face high tariff and non-tariff barriers abroad. Consider just one example. The market for agricultural products in Korea, which is the world's 13th largest economy. Korea's tariffs on imported agricultural goods average 54%, compared to an average 9% tariff on these imports into the United States. 54% added on for us to get our agricultural products into Korea, only 9% for them to get those same products into the United States. That is a 45% differential, Mr. President. Passage of the Korea Free Trade Agreement will level this playing field. Yet this administration continues to delay sending the agreements to Congress. The Obama White House would prefer to hold these agreements hostage because of a desire to expand the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program rather than improve the competitive position of American producers. At a time of near-record unemployment and slow economic growth, this delay is unacceptable. And I want to just put a fine point on that, Mr. President, by just this morning, the numbers came out. The Bureau of Economic Analysis released its advance estimate of growth in the inflation-adjusted gross domestic product, GDP, for the second quarter. And according to the advance estimate, annualized GDP growth in the second quarter was just 1.3%. Now, if you look at, they went back and revised the first quarter of 2011. They revised it downward to 0.4%, down from a reported rate of 1.9%. So they've adjusted downward the first quarter growth rate from 1.9% down to 0.4%, and we now know, according to the advance estimate at least, that second quarter GDP growth is only 1.3%. Way under what the assumptions have been, way under what the estimates have been, and way under what it's going to take for us to get the economy turned around and growing again and get people back to work. And you couple that with the job-crushing regulations, the taxes that have come since this administration has taken office, Mr. President, is making it very, very difficult for our economy to recover and to grow and to get back on track. And so the administration would like to hold these agreements hostage because of their desire to expand the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program rather than get these producers back access to these markets that we should have access to in some of these countries. And we just can't afford to wait any longer to do that. The reasons are very clear. We've got an economy that is sluggish, that is struggling to get back on its feet. We have 3 free trade agreements that have been hanging around here, languishing literally now for 4 years, that would open up export opportunities and, as I said, even according to the President's own estimates, add 70,000 jobs to our economy. Well, the position of Leader McConnell and Republican senators has been consistent from the beginning. We are happy to have a debate on the merits of expanding trade adjustment assistance and to consider this bill as a standalone measure. But we will not hold the trade agreements hostage to consideration of trade adjustment assistance. I want to commend my colleagues, Senators Portman and Blunt, for the letter that they recently spearheaded with 10 other Republican senators committing to support the necessary procedural votes to consider trade adjustment assistance as a standalone measure and on its own merits. In light of this letter, it's very clear that the administration has run out of excuses for not submitting the trade agreements to Congress. And I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, to be able to enter the Portman-Blunt letter into the record. There is a path forward in both the House and the Senate for trade adjustment assistance, and we have bipartisan majorities in both chambers waiting to vote for the Korea, Colombia, and Panama agreements. So why are we still waiting for the White House to do the right thing and send us these agreements? This ongoing delay is having a real impact on American businesses, and it will only get worse. On July 1st, the European Union Korea trade agreement went into effect. According to press reports, European exports to Korea rose 16% in the first 13 days after the Korea-EU free trade agreement entered into force. Now let's be clear, Mr. President, about what this means. Korean consumers are choosing to buy German, French, and British cars, electronics, and agricultural products rather than American-made products because these European products now have a price advantage. This was entirely preventable if we had acted on the U.S.-Korea agreement sooner. Likewise, the Canada-Colombia agreement will go into effect on August the 15th. This will result in an advantage for Canadian goods such as construction equipment, aircraft, and a range of other industrial and agricultural products. Much as with Korea, United States businesses will find themselves at a competitive disadvantage because we have failed to act. Again, this did not have to happen. The administration finalized its labor action plan for Colombia back in April. We've had plenty of time to consider these agreements over the past several months. Instead, we are facing a situation where United States wheat producers are likely to be completely shut out of the Colombian market once the agreement with Canada has gone into effect. This is amazing if you think about it. When you consider that just a few years ago, American wheat producers dominated the market in Colombia with a 73% market share. That was as of 2008. In 2010, for the first time in the history of the United States-Colombia trade, the U.S. lost to Argentina its position as Colombia's #1 agricultural supplier. Now consider the story of the three crops that we grow, well, among the three crops that we grow in South Dakota: soybeans, corn, and wheat. The combined market share in Colombia for these three U.S. agricultural exports has decreased from 81% in 2008 to 19% as of 2010, a decline of 62 percentage points in a 2-year period. 81% to 19% market share in corn, wheat, and soybeans for American agricultural producers. You think about that. That is a staggering collapse, Mr. President, which was totally avoidable, totally preventable if we had simply acted on these trade agreements much sooner. This is the real cost of our delay, while our trading partners continue to pursue new regional and bilateral trade agreements. We're living in a global economy where America cannot afford to stand still on trade. Senator Baucus noted at a recent Finance Committee hearing, in 1960, exports accounted for only 3.6% of our entire U.S. GDP. Today, exports account for 12.5% of our GDP. Exports of U.S. goods and services support over 10 million American jobs. It is long past time that we get back in the game by passing the 3 pending trade agreements. America's manufacturers, America's farmers, America's service providers cannot afford to wait any longer. And so I call upon the administration, Mr. President, to submit the trade agreements to Congress before the August recess. We're not going to be able to consider these agreements until September, but sending them to Congress now will send a strong signal that this administration is finally serious about getting them done. It would also be good and be an important show of good faith to our close allies, South Korea, Colombia, and Panama. Mr. President, these job-creating, market opening trade agreements should be at the top of the agenda when we get back in September. And again, I want to reemphasize the importance of that in light of these economic numbers, the data that's coming out that points out that in the second quarter of this year, our economic growth was a sluggish 1.3%, and that the revised estimate now for the first quarter of this year was 0.4%. We will never get the unemployment rate down. We will never get America's economy expanding and back on its feet. We will never start dealing with these massive debt issues that we have. One, if we don't cut spending, which is the other issue we're debating today, but also if we're not growing and expanding the American economy. We can do that. There are so many things that these trade agreements would do, not only for agricultural exporters, but for other producers of American goods. And we ought to be doing that, Mr. President. It is high time that we at least did some of the things that we can do to get the economy growing again. And I can't emphasize enough the lost market opportunities, the lost chance at economic growth, the lost jobs that are associated with the fact that this administration has delayed now, since they've been in office, 2.5 years, in submitting these 3 free trade agreements to Congress, 3 free trade agreements that have broad bipartisan support for Congress, which we as Republicans have been waiting to act upon now for almost the 4 years since these agreements were negotiated in the first place. And so it's high time that we change that. It's one thing that we can do to affect the economy in this country, among the other things. And I would simply add as sort of a final point that the debate that we're having about the debt limit is also one that needs to be dealt with if we're going to get serious about growing the economy and creating jobs. Because if you look at the economy today, you look at this president's economic record, and you look at the data, almost every metric that you can measure, he has made this economy much worse. And the president has said repeatedly, and he said it in his speech the other night, blames the previous administration for where we are today. And I don't think anybody here would dispute the fact that he inherited a difficult set of economic circumstances, but there is no question, if you look at every metric, that he has made the situation much worse. Whether that's unemployment, which is up 18%, there are 2.1 million more people unemployed today than there were when he took office. Whether it's the debt, which has grown by 35% since he took office. Whether it's the number of Americans who are receiving food stamps, which has gone up by 40% since he took office. And I might add, in my state of South Dakota, by 58% increase in the number of people receiving food stamps. The cost of health care in this country is up 19% since this president took office. The cost of gasoline has gone up almost 100%, 99% since this president took office. The amount of the debt per person in this country has gone up by $11,000. Every American now owes $11,000 more as a share of their share of our federal debt since this president took office. The economic record of this administration is abysmal. And it is high time that we took the steps to do something about that. And it strikes me, at least, as I look at the policies that they've been putting in place, that they seem to want to make it more difficult and more expensive for people in this country to create jobs. You see that in regulations coming out of all these various agencies. You see it in the massive run-up in growth, in the size of government, the new mandates that have been imposed on a lot of our small businesses as a result of the new health care bill, the new taxes that have been imposed on our small businesses as a result of the new health care legislation. At every turn, American small businesses who create the jobs that will get this economy growing again tell us that the economic uncertainty, the job-crushing policies that are coming out of this administration have been a major inhibitor, a major impediment to them creating jobs and getting people back to work in this country. And the trade agreements is just something I would add on to that list. We got 3 trade agreements that have been teed up now for almost 4 years since they were negotiated. This administration has been in office now for 2.5 years. The president continually gets up, as he does at the State of the Union, and talks about wanting to double trade in 5 years, talks about supporting these 3 trade agreements, and yet it's a very simple thing. All he has to do is to submit them to Congress. The trade agreements are negotiated. All he has to do is to send them up here, and we are ready to act to put Americans back to work, to open up export opportunities to American producers, to get the economy growing again and creating jobs. And so, Mr. President, I hope that in addition to dealing with the issue of runaway spending and debt, which in my view is the predominant issue that we need to deal with, and clearly between now and Tuesday, we've got to get a solution in place that will avert the economic adversity that we could be dealing with, adverse circumstances, if we don't deal with that. But that needs to be accompanied by serious reductions in spending reforms, and then we've got to be putting in place policies that will enable economic growth in this country, that will make it less expensive, less difficult for small businesses to create jobs, not more difficult. And unfortunately, that is the record to date of this administration. I hope we can change that. We can start today by sending these trade agreements up to the Congress so that we can act on them and get these things approved and get American businesses exporting to these three countries. Mr. President, I yield the floor.